So friends, thank you for this next panel discussion. Again, I'm Case Thorp with First Presbyterian Church of Orlando and the Collaborative. And I love that I get a chance to talk to a significant author who has hit it big in the last 6 months. Has this been out?
August.
Has hit it big in the publishing world. He is a pastor at an important church here in Orlando. He is the son of First Pres Orlando. He is one of our byproducts.
Third generation First Pres.
Oh, I didn't realize it was
My grandparents joined in the 40s.
Oh, wow. Okay. A missionary at one point with crew that I, as the mission pastor, got to support. And also a friend and a good buddy. I appreciate Jim's friendship. We are busy dads in ministry, and we text a lot, and it might be a month or two before we have a conversation, but it's like we picked up where we left off. So, welcome.
Thanks, man.
Glad that you're here.
It's good to be here.
So, friends, if you have not read this book yet, you need to. The Great DeChurching, that he co-wrote with Michael Graham. Michael can't be with us today, but has served in pastoral ministry with Jim for a number of years and is now the content director, program director.
Austin might know better than me. Program director.
Program director with the Keller Center at the Gospel Coalition. And they did this with Ryan Burge, who is a sociologist.
Social scientist.
I
used to say sociologist, and I was corrected. Social scientist. I don't even know the difference. I just know that's what I'm supposed to say.
Okay. Well, maybe because he pulls the data and somebody else tells you what it means.
Well, he does both, so I still don't understand it, but I've been corrected, so social scientist.
All right. Political scientist.
Okay.
Well, Ryan Burge is a great guy, and he helped them do this great book. I just want you to know, it's been featured New York Times, Wall Street Journal, The Atlantic, NPR, C-SPAN, The Ben Shapiro Show, Dispatch. I mean, where else? Brag.
Carmen
on the radio.
That's right.
Nuance, my podcast.
That's right.
That episode comes out this week, everybody, so subscribe. But it's just really tremendous and a joy to see you really get these ideas far and wide. So tell us, what was the reason for the book, your approach, and then we'll get to findings.
Yeah, so this project really started out of two pastors wanting to do cultural exegesis. There was no plan for a book. It was not on our radar in any way. I grew up in Orlando, and some of you, how many of you have been here for more than, say, 35 years? Okay, so a number of you. So growing up in Orlando in the 90s, it kind of felt like Orlando was becoming the Christian Mecca. I mean, on the church side, you had First Pres was the second largest mainline church in the United States, and you had First Baptist, where Jim Henry was the president of the Southern Baptist Convention, and they're booming. You have Joel, my goodness, pioneering, the technology in the worship space, the non-denominational space,
planting in a roller rink.
Yes, from a roller rink to 20,000 people on a Sunday or on a weekend, excuse me, and in the church you even had Benny Hinn here doing his thing. I mean, pick your theological stream. There was something to be excited about. And then on the institutional front, you had RTS moves here, Campus Crusade moves here, R.C. Sproul and Ligonier. Then you have Wycliffe, Pioneers. I mean, it's just like, it feels like something special is happening in Orlando. So I moved away, went to college, moved around the world, came back in 2018, and Mike Graham and I were just talking about Orlando feels so different than it did back back before we left. And we found a Barna study that claimed that Orlando had the same percentage of evangelicals as New York City and Seattle. And we believed the study, but we were trying to process this. Okay, but culturally, we feel so different than New York City and Seattle. So what is different? And we began to realize, well, most of the people we talk to who don't go to church used to go to church, and they carry with them some biblical foundation or values, if not actually seeming to be Christian. And so we in that same Barna study, their claim was that 42% of the Orlando Orlando metropolitan area used to go to church and now no longer does. So that means about 2 million people. And we wanted more research, but it just wasn't out there. It wasn't out there. And so anecdotally, there were two things that really made us want to research this. One, my wife was getting her master's in counseling at Reformed Theological Seminary. She was taking apologetics with Justin Holcomb, the bishop of this diocese, and she wanted to do a paper on DeChurching, a research paper. And he said, that sounds great. I know this is what Jim's passionate about, but there's no research.
Wait. She doesn't get author billing, though.
No, because she never did anything. There was nothing. There was nothing on that front. I shouldn't say.
We just catch you on tape saying she's never done anything.
No. I have publicly thanked her in my book for all the ways that she contributed. It just wasn't in researching.
Yeah. We love Angela.
Yes,
Angela's the best.
That's an important caveat. I want to be clear on that. So, but he said there's nothing to research, and we wanted to know more, but it wasn't out there. And then I gave a really short 10-minute talk at a global ministries fundraising event, and I opened for Max Lucado, and I did my little 10-minute thing, and Max did his amazing thing. And afterwards, I found myself in this surreal spot where I had this line of people wanting to talk to me, and I look over and I saw Max Lucado getting coffee by himself, and I'm thinking, this doesn't make any sense. This is Max Lucado.
Max is so yesterday. I'm kidding.
But I realized what it was as I talked to person after person. When I talked for 10 minutes about DeChurching, I'm talking about their children and their nephews and their grandchildren and their nieces, and they're giving me the cards, whatever we can do to help. And so we thought, all right, this is something if nobody's researching this, we want to at least start a conversation. And our goal was to start a national conversation. And so we had the thesis that we had was, this is not an Orlando problem. We think we're in the largest and fastest religious shift in the history of our country. And we commissioned Ryan Burge, who then later brought on Paul Jupe, to do a nationwide peer-reviewed quantitative national study in which he did prove we are, in fact, in the largest and fastest religious shift in the history of our country. The previous largest shift, and all my answers won't be this long, sorry, but
this is good.
So the previous largest shift was the 25 years post-Civil War. Our shift in terms of percentage is 25% greater than that in the past 25 years, just going the opposite direction. And in terms of numbers, it's larger than the First Great Awakening, the Second Great Awakening, and all the Billy Graham Crusades combined. So,
okay, I want to pause there, which I did with Mike on the podcast, because that blows my mind. So the First Great Awakening, mid-1700s, with Asbury and such. Wycliffe, who's the... I should know the Presbyterian.
Whitfield?
Yeah. I should know that. Second Great Awakening, 1820s, after the Civil War, and then all the Billy Graham Crusades.
That's right.
And this is adjusted for population.
Well, that's why I do numbers and percentage.
Okay.
So one is adjusted for population, one is just numbers.
Explain that clearly.
So the percentage of the country shifting. Okay, so in the 25 years post-Civil War and what we've experienced now, it is a 25% greater shift in terms of the total percentage of the country.
Okay.
Then you have the actual numbers. We're obviously a lot larger now.
Got it.
So in terms of numbers, it just blows it all away. So it's important to talk about numbers and percentage of population.
And is that number just Christians, or is it people of all faiths?
So let me answer that by defining how we used the term DeChurching. Okay. For our study, we called a de-churched person somebody who used to go to church on a monthly basis and now goes less than once per year. So this is important because someone who only goes to First Pres on Christmas.
We don't have, no, everybody.
Yeah. They're not de-churched for our study. So you can make an argument that this is a larger problem than what we are even showing. We're just being conservative in the way that we do our research.
So Creasters are in the camp in this study.
They're churched people by our standards. You have to go less than once per year. And so with that definition, there are 40 million adult Americans who are now de-churched, and the lion's share happened in the past 25 years.
So, but about other faiths.
Yeah, okay, thank you. So of the 40 million, About 20 million dechurched from Roman Catholic and mainline spaces, 15 million from evangelical spaces, and 5 million from other houses of worship. So things that we would consider not to be Orthodox Christianity. This could be synagogue, mosques, Mormons, Jehovah's Witness.
Okay.
Okay.
Wow. Some of the reasons. Now, I know you've got a casually dechurched and dechurched casualties. Explain that to us.
So this is what was, there were a few surprises in the research. This was the first really big one, although it fit what we had experienced anecdotally. If your media intake is more to the left, then you're going to say the reason people are dechurching is because of church hypocrisy, misogyny, racism, pastoral abuse, and scandals. That's their answer.
And they're talking about those other people, not themselves.
If your media intake is from the left, they're going to point at the church and say the church is the problem.
Got it.
That's why people are leaving. If your media intake is more from the right, they're going to say, well, it's the sexual revolution and progressive secularism. That it's the culture. That's the problem. And what's interesting is while both are right, that happens, they're only talking about 1/4 of dechurching. The lion's share is in the middle and is neither. The number one...
So 1/4 of the 40 million that applies to...
10 of the 20 are what we would call dechurched casualties. So they did dechurch intentionally with pain points, whether they were cultural pain points or pain points in the church. I mean, we fleshed that out, but they were what we called the casualties. But
I'm mad, I don't like that, I'm out.
Yes.
Okay, but then this is the surprise.
So the number one reason for dechurching in the United States was I moved. Number one reason. So 30 million of the 40 million did not dechurch intentionally. Over half of the 15 million evangelicals who have dechurched would say they're willing to come back today. Today. Even if they've been gone for 20 years, they would come back today. So moving, life transitions. What's interesting is dechurching hits the lower educated, lower income harder than any other demographic. Because if you think the lion's share of dechurching is happening in life transition, well, who does life transition hit the hardest? Those who don't have the financial and social safety net to become a single parent and not have to work long and unusual hours.
Okay. Now, that's another shock that the number one reason for leaving the church is because you moved. But I, as a pastor, feel the guilt for that because it makes me question how well were they discipled to begin with, such that when they moved and left my church, they didn't feel a need to get in somewhere. They weren't thriving necessarily in their church engagement to begin with.
Yeah.
Am I right on that?
You're not wrong, but what we're trying to do instead of, it's kind of like, this is why parenting books don't sell, is because people feel a lot of guilt and they don't want to read it. So what we want to help churches take a look in the mirror, but do so and say, instead of you've done this wrong, here is an opportunity for us all to grow. So in terms of just moving, there's the receiving end and the sending end. So Orlando is more on the receiving end, generally speaking. So we're working with a number of churches, this diocese included, and how do we mobilize the first points of contact in our churches for new people? So school teachers, school administrators, realtors, how can we show them the missional value inherent in what they're doing? And then this gets more to your question, when we send somebody off as churches, are we engaged with them for 3, 6, 9, 12 months? Because it doesn't impact our little K kingdom, but there's great kingdom value in making sure somebody's able to find a healthy church wherever they're going.
Okay, so we're here for the political polarization dynamic to this, and aren't I correct? Then that would be one of your dechurch casualties, that a political something has upset them and they depart. So what did your research show?
So we asked a lot of questions, because when you say political, they might disagree with the politics of the clergy. They might disagree with the politics of the congregation. Those are different things. What was most interesting, though, is that the secular right is now de-churching at twice the pace of the secular left, almost catching up in full number to the secular left that has already de-churched.
And when you're saying left and right, you're talking politically.
Yes.
Now, we know sometimes that does kind of align. Evangelicals are sometimes more politically conservative, not always, and the other way. But when you say that, you're particularly talking about secular right, politically right.
Yeah, I'm talking about political, and I'm using the word secular because they have de-churched.
They're already gone.
They are on the political right, and the political right is leaving the church right now at twice the pace of the political left.
Because?
Well, that's a really good question. So this is where you, in social science, and again, I'm not a social scientist, but I've learned a lot from Ryan Burge. In social science, you have the data and you say, okay, this is absolutely happening. Now we have to try and figure out why. So there are different theories on why. A lot of this de-churching, it's increasing in the past 4 or 5 years. And what has happened in the past 4 or 5 years? A lot of turmoil in our country. And when there's turmoil and people feel fear and uncertainty, they want to hold on to something for hope. And we're realizing that a lot of people are holding on to politics for their ultimate hope more than they are Jesus. And so it's kind of the cart and the horse. Okay, I am all for political engagement. So you know this. When I was at Florida State, before I became a Christian, my goal was to be the governor of the state of Florida. And my senior class president campaign at Florida State was run by Representative Matt Gaetz. So I'm not endorsing. I'm just saying I was very involved.
Yes,
but
were.
you have. So I'm not against political engagement, but the question is, where's the horse and where's the cart? So if Jesus is the horse, then that's gonna be okay. We can be politically involved, engaged, and be okay if we lose, because Jesus is the horse. When the horse is the politics and the cart is Jesus, well, then you have lots of problems. You have people starting to come to church and are upset that we're not championing their ultimate hope. So, and I've been pretty open with this, but in November of 2020, there was a whole contingent. I've talked with Joel about this, who wanted us to hand out right-wing voter guides.
Us being your church.
Yes, people in the church wanted us to hand out right-wing voter guides in church. And my response was, is Jesus on the ticket? I mean, unless it's Jesus, we're not doing that. This is not our ultimate hope. So there's a lot to be said there, but from my perspective, I look at the past two candidates. I actually said this in a sermon a few weeks ago, and I liken the two candidates to the Jewish itinerant preachers in Ephesus, who are just trying to tack Jesus on to something to make themselves more successful. And why would we let two people like that divide the Church of Jesus Christ? It's just, to me, we're better than that. And so we're trying to call our church specifically to not just get through this next season, but to thrive in it.
We'll come back to the book, but I think this might be helpful for this crowd. So prior to the book, Michael, your co-author, wrote a significant article that as well got a great deal of readership on what he defined, I think, were the
six-way fracturing of evangelicalism.
Tell us all about that. And this is fascinating, people. Get ready to do your own congregational exegesis and see it blossom.
I think this is one of the most helpful articles to come out of the past 4 years, and it's fun to see some heads shaking.
Say the title again,
The
clearly.
Six-Way Fracturing of Evangelicalism. It was written for Mere Orthodoxy. It is the number one most read article in the history of Mere Orthodoxy. So it was kind of came about out of our church. When we're looking at, Michael was our executive pastor at the time. We had our youth director named Skylar Flowers, who now works with TGC2 as part-time. He's a pastor in Oxford, Mississippi. And we were just observing all the fracturing that's happening in our own context. And then honestly, Orlando has a lot of Christian institutions here that were experiencing tension, and we're no longer one happy family.
And what year or what time was this?
We began, I feel like the MLK 50th that was put on in 2018 by TGC and the ERLC of the SBC. That to me was the flashpoint.
Okay, that's a lot of letters. So
Russell Moore's group.
Russell Moore's former group, the Southern Baptist Convention, the Gospel Coalition, had a celebration of sorts at the 50-year death of Martin Luther King Jr. in Memphis.
Yes.
And so a lot of leaders, theologians, others were there, and not everybody was thrilled that they were there.
There were a lot of people were not thrilled.
Was this before or after George Floyd?
Well before. This is 2 years before.
This is before pandemic. Okay.
So, I mean, so things had been brewing for some time. This became a sort of flashpoint that began to officially divide organizations. There are pastors that would speak at multiple large conferences, and the conferences were like, them or us. You can't speak at both of them anymore. And so we began to see this fracturing. It's playing out in our church, full disclosure, from 2019 to 2021, we lost 60% of the membership of our church.
And this is also during the Trump administration too. So it wasn't just
COVID,
Memphis,
race,
it was
and politics. Because all what was happening in the United States, and Ross, I always want to say Douthat. That's not how you pronounce his name. Douthat. So he wrote an article talking in the New York Times about how that season, we as Americans were forced to have 10 years of conversation in about a year and a half. And so that's not going to go well. I mean, and so what we're seeing is we're seeing the fruit of us doing that and not being prepared. So I'm going to get back to, I don't want to get too off course, but what's interesting to me is if you look at Christian Twitter in 2019 and 2020, it is solidly 6 months ahead of all mainline media. So what that says is Christian leaders were talking about all of these issues well before mainstream media. And I think we had an opportunity to lead well, and we failed miserably.
And so these 6 fractures.
So, all right. So really the first 4 categories, 1, 2, 3, and 4 are churched people. And that's where I'm going to focus. 5 and 6 are dechurched people. That's where we really started to look at that. But what most people have found helpful from Mike's article, who he wrote with Skylar Flowers, is you have 1, 2, 3, 4. I'm trying to figure out the best way to, I know that they didn't want to put names on these because that became difficult for a lot of reasons. So we just did numbers. But before 2018, you could have an organization or a church that could span all from 1 to 4. So
political spectrum.
There's overlapping politics. So let's say if 1 would be, gosh, I want to be as careful as I can. 1 would be the more right-wing side of the church, and might fall into generally the Christian nationalism. 2 would be more in the T4G space, the Al Mohler space. 3 would be more TGC, Tim Keller. 3, that's 3, excuse me.
Now he's Presbyterian. So the TGC, the Gospel Coalition, Tim Keller.
Yeah. That would be more the 3 space. Admittedly, that's where I fall. And then 4 would be people who are still Christians. They are still churched people, but they've given up on white evangelicalism. They're moving towards anything from cell movements to Black Protestant church, other, or like honestly, maybe even this diocese would be a good example.
Anglican higher church.
Right. Anything more mainline, but still holding on to the gospel. And so what was interesting and relevant to most people is you used to be able to have a church or an organization that would span all 4 categories. You now, at best, get 2 adjacent categories. Pick the 2, but you're only going to get 2. You can be a 1-2 church, you can be a 2-3 church, you can be a 3-4 church, but you cannot be a 1-2-3, you cannot be a 2-3-4. Maybe that'll come back one day, but it is just gone. And so in what we were a 1-2 church, and they hired a person who's a 3 before we had any of these categories. And so there was tension already, but we have become a 2-3 church. And we're very cognizant that that's the space that we're going to be in, and we're going to, we would love for the tent to get bigger one day, but right now it's just not.
Well, and I see that. I had lunch with a parishioner 2 weeks ago, and our continual conversation is how disaffiliated he feels with the majority of our congregation. Not because of lack of friendliness and community. It's just he's much more progressive than a lot of the other folks, and he struggles with it constantly. He's like, I don't get any of that from y'all up front. I feel like my faith is fed. I just look around and everybody's conversations are about things that I completely disagree with. Everybody's very welcoming. And he's like, I don't leave because I love the worship and I love the friendships, but I'm always, yeah. And that's sad to me.
Yeah, it is sad. It is sad because the Church of Jesus Christ should be able to be united in what is primary, the gospel of Jesus Christ, and we should be able to freely disagree on issues of application of wisdom. Inherent in the application of wisdom is that we're going to disagree, but we should be able to still be brothers and sisters in Christ and disagree on the way forward. So we can all agree racism is a sin. Everyone that I know would agree on that. The way forward is fairly complex, even though I have strong opinions on this. But I feel the freedom because the way forward is the application of wisdom to disagree with brothers and sisters and maintain healthy relationships. But that is just not the way the American church is functioning right now.
So in closing, if the number one reason for DeChurching is that I moved, so political polarization is way down the list.
It is.
Do you remember exactly what number?
It's not.
Top 10,
it's not that easy because what we did is we took all this data, 7,000 participants, 600 data points, and we ran it through an AI algorithm called machine learning, and it began to. It's not like where does all this rank among everybody? How do we take common answers and group them together to understand who we're looking at? Because what we wanted to communicate, from the data is that the de-churched are not monolithic. They are very different. There are different kinds of de-churched people. So there are some for whom politics is going to be a bigger issue, and there are some for whom some groups that it is not going to be a big issue. But we find it more helpful to understand who we're looking at rather than just trying to lump them all together and say, where was politics in the general survey?
So there aren't any easy answers or prescriptions for how to help reach those who've been hurt by the politics?
Well, so what we would argue is if you read the book and know the different types of de-churched evangelicals, so we hone in on evangelicals, and when we say evangelicals, we're talking about the Bevington quadrilateral, not a political affiliation.
Tell us what that is.
Well, it's the historic definition of evangelicalism, and if I remember right, it's crucicentrism, biblicism, conversionism, and activism.
And that first one's the cross.
Right. The centrality of the cross, the inerrancy of the Bible, the need to put our faith in Jesus, and then that we are here to live and serve in the world for Him.
And that's Babington.
Babington?
Is that?
I said Bevington is what Bevington.
Okay,
yeah.
But you also evangelical, and you're from the South, dude. Why do you say evangelical? Go ahead. It's evangelical. But go ahead.
There we go. It's debatable whether Orlando is the South, but
well, good point. Good point.
So
where were you?
Our hope is that we can get better at identifying what type of de-churched evangelical are we looking at. Because some of them, the mainstream de-churched evangelical, 100% of these people, 2.5 million people, are willing to come back today. And when knowing the categories in about 3-4 questions with somebody, I can know, oh, you're a de-churched mainstream evangelical. You don't have a pain point. You've de-churched more recently. 98% of them believe that Jesus is the Son of God. It is a simple invitation for that person. And I'm batting 1,000 right now on meeting them and inviting them to church and coming and usually sticking. But there is another group, the ex-evangelicals, that we use that term a little different than you're going to hear in the mainstream space. But there's a group, they are still Christians largely, but they have been hurt and they left the church. And so we're going to have to, they need much more than a nudge. So some people need a nudge. Some people need to be at the dinner table before they're going to be in church. And some people are going to take a long time to walk with. And we flesh out in the book how we would walk with them.
Wow. So y'all would love to do a second study and project, right?
So the reason books like this don't get written is because we had to raise $100,000 before we could ever do the research. So net, you're never going to make your money off of this, but we had some Christians who generously provided for this research. So there, I'm not thinking about the next book right now.
But if there were a donor who wanted to help make it happen,
we've got a list of about 10 different things that we would like more research on.
And if that happens, I get 10% because I put it out.
The finder's fee.
Friends, would you please thank Jim for being with us?
Thanks, man.